Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. Today again with me is Brother Omar Shaukat, and he is a research fellow at the Afro-Middle East Center, where he's specializing on research on the Islamic State at the moment. In the previous interview, we discussed the basics, the history, the ideology, and of course the rise of the Islamic State, and we concluded by touching on a very, very important question, and that is, what is justice? And I would like to bring that discussion back to this, the second interview, and raise it somewhere with you. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, so when we're looking at this whole notion of what is justice, there's issues for me specifically. I'm still waiting to hear the interpretation about the manner in which women are treated. I mean, the way in which women have been treated in the Muslim majority countries all over the world raises many questions. And I mean, in many, I suppose it is the springboard for people to take advantage of invasions. If we look at Afghanistan, we're coming to liberate the Afghani woman. Iraq, we're bringing democracy and we're bringing, rights to women, etc. So the woman has always been at the Muslim woman is at the center, and she is the springboard for which many issues come about. But for me as a Muslim woman who understands my religion, who knows the rights that Islam has given me, who knows that Islam has elevated my status, and that there is this patriarchal mentality, that there is culture, that there's power relations involved. I look at the Islamic State and then I have to question all these discourses and narratives that are coming about sex slaves, about the abuse of women, about rape. Almost every discussion that comes out about the Islamic State, they're talking about raping of women. These don't fit in my mind of an Islamic understanding. So how do I understand this whole concept about the treatment of women? And then of course, on the other hand, the treatment of prisoners of war, of the beheading, etc., and put this together with justice?
Yeah. So, first I should mention that this kind of information that we're getting is coming from two sources. Because I know lots of people, in my daily conversations, I'm realizing that they're not really buying. Especially if they have some sympathies for the Islamic State, they tend to discount what they consider as the ugly aspects of the Islamic State. And they're saying this is obviously propaganda put by the Western media to dismiss the Khilafah or to make Muslims look bad or to justify further invasion. But in response to that, I would say we have two sources. One is you have the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, other groups like that. And many of them have local operatives. I mean, when we're talking about these groups, they have Iraqi, Syrian, Muslim people who are doing the research for them. So they've gotten these accounts from people who ran away from IS, and they are the ones who are coming back and reporting their treatment of women. And on the other hand, I think far more important than the first source is actually IS documents itself. IS has its media sources through which it releases certain documents, and within that they've tried to justify what they're doing. And specifically, if you look at this issue of the Yazidi slave girls, I mean, let's just consider this for a second. And again, even the slave girl, I mean, this is a term that that it's from English. It's not necessarily something that Muslims would agree with. Whether you're looking at IS or the history of Islam. But let's just use this for now. And over there, the issue is that in the Quran and within Sharia, there is a broader discussion within ulum Sharia that you can take ma malaka imanukum, so those which your right hand possess, and you are allowed to have sexual relations with them. But they have used, the Islamic State has in its literature used that kind of discussion from the Quran, from the Hadith, from the larger Islamic history, and they said, look, we can do this, and we are doing this because we are in a harb, we are in a war, we are fighting, and when you're fighting, you are allowed to take slaves, and part of that slave-taking process is this. Now, some people have looked at that and they said, okay, fine, this is something that's allowed. But again, there's a lot of, connecting this to the earlier discussion we were having about what is justice. And all of it depends on how you interpret a particular instance in which this event is occurring, and how you understand the sources of Islam as well. So, for example, there are other ulama who might say something like this, that urf or custom is a source of law.
Yes.
And if that is a source of law, we are living in a time period in which the custom or the urf is that you do not take slaves. So if this becomes a source of law, then you cannot take slaves anymore, because the earlier rulings were for a time period in which everybody was taking slaves.
That's correct.
So that's one way to challenge them, right? But again, like I'm saying, it depends on how now some other ulama might say urf is not and for many of them, it is not a custom, it is not a source of law.
Because Sharia is stronger.
Yeah, because they would say, well, even if it is, it does not outdo the validity
of the Quran,
or of the hadith. But again, this is a debate that people need to have. And that's why I keep saying, what is Islamic, what is not Islamic, depends on your perspective on this issue.
But even taking the woman as slaves, for example, say if they take woman malakat aymanukum, there are conditions for that. Of course, it's absolute justice in the good treatment, fairness, keeping them well. Are they advocating for that, or are they saying only the one part that we are entitled to take them?
Yeah, again, so there are violations that obviously might happen, even from what the Islamic State leadership in its official documents justifies. Within that framework, there are violations that might happen. For example, the beating of a slave girl for reasons for which the leadership might not think that this is justified. So what I'm saying is there is a larger justification that happens. Now, within that, the nitty-gritty details, I think they leave it up to their followers. And it's just like any other legal system in the world. The court or the constitution will not stipulate each and every action. But, they obviously say something like you have to treat them well. But what does treating well consist of in a particular situation is going to be up for debate.
And I would agree with that, because you can't hold every single person. Let me say it this way: you can't negate an entire system because of the actions of a few. For in the same way, for example, as you cannot judge a religion by its abuses. We know that the religion is basically the fundamental essence of that religion is justice. But looking at the abuse does not mean that the entire religion is abusive. So, but I want to put my finger on this to understand: are they behaving in a just way, barring the few incidences of violations, barring the few incidences of abuse? Are they making an effort to follow the Sharia? Is there that kind of leadership? Is there that kind of understanding within the followers? Or is this everybody just rushing in that we need Khalifa, we need to take on the kuffar, we need to fight the West, we need to get rid of the oppressive rulers, and in the process you forget the humanity of Islam also?
Yeah. Let me put it this way. So there are Syrian ulama who have come out and given a fatwa on this issue of, say, beheading. And they said, it's a very long fatwa. I think it's about 17, 18 pages it runs to. But the basic idea is that they mention something, they mention a hadith in which it says, the translation roughly is that God has written Al-Ihsan.
Yes.
Now, anybody who knows Arabic knows Al-Ihsan is a very difficult word to translate. But over here, they understand it to mean something like mercy, something like good treatment, something like gentleness.
Yeah.
So they say, they quote that hadith and they say, so the Prophet says God has written mercy, ihsan on everything. So therefore, when you kill,
there must be mercy.
Kill them with ihsan.
Okay.
Right? When you engage in zabh, what you do for qurbani, do it with ihsan.
Yes.
And I'm purposely leaving this word untranslated because that's where the issue is.
Yes.
The Syrian ulama who've said that what IS is doing by beheading people, right? And they say, first of all, the method of beheading according to the Syrian ulama is that you hit the neck. Yes. You don't slit the throat.
You smite the neck, yes.
Yeah. So for them, the larger point is that this is not how punishment should be meted out. Ta'zeeb, yes. Torture is not allowed at all. So the larger issue over here is that for those Syrian ulama, what they're doing, what the IS is doing, is completely un-Islamic. But there are Syrian ulama, but there are people associated with IS who try to justify it. They might justify it in terms of, where the Quran says that you have to strike fear in the heart of the enemy, and they say whatever method is allowed. Now, some other ulama would say, well, not every method is allowed. You see what I'm saying? And this is what we some people have criticized me for being too generous to IS and not coming out and saying that what they do engaging in is just absolute abuse of the Sharia. I might think that personally, but what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand what they're doing.
Yes.
If we don't understand our enemy, even if the enemy is our enemy, then, we will never be able to convince them to do otherwise.
Yeah, no, but I have the same problem because I saw people rushing out to condemn, and I'm way past that point. I don't believe that every time a Muslim, there is some kind of an action or a misaction or an abuse by Muslim that we have to rush out and condemn. I don't see it happening with any other religion, and I feel that the context for me is far more important, because I don't believe people just wake up one day and decide to go around killing people, or that they just wake up one day and try and get people, find journalists, etc., and then go and behead them. There is a huge context towards this, which we need to analyze, and that there's a driven anger also. I mean, there's years of suppression, of oppression, of abuse, of theft of resources, of land, of raping of the Muslim woman, etc. People get frustrated, they get fed up, and of course it pushes you to the limits where even your humanity is challenged. So rather than rushing to condemn, I feel it's more important to know the context so that we can resolve the issue from the root up. But very quickly, before we go to a break, I mean, how would you put this then in sum it up?
I would just say that we need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they do put out justifications for themselves, and not just, even if you're coming from an Islamic perspective, dismiss them summarily. We have to understand what they're saying.
Okay, so we're going to break. We'll see you after that. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the final segment, part 2 of this interview with Omar, Shaukat, and we're discussing the Islamic State. Before we went into the break, we discussed, Omar mentioned, and I would have to agree, if I may say so, that the Islamic State cannot summarily be dismissed. You have to look at the context, you have to look at what they're saying, and of course there are disagreements in terms of the Sharia and how the Sharia is interpreted. But Omar, besides the Sharia and how it's interpreted, of course there is a lot of misunderstanding from the Muslims, or maybe disagreement in terms of understanding from the Muslims, but also if you look at from the Western powers, to me it looks like they absolutely just don't know what they're doing. They went into Iraq when they were warned not to go in. It was opening a Pandora's box. They went into Afghanistan, and we know Afghanistan is the land where empires are delegated to the dustbin. So they seem to be repeating these mistakes over and over again. And on RT yesterday there was a news headline which stated that the CIA has actually underestimated the amount of fighters who are with the Islamic State. According to the report that was presented by RT, is that there are maybe 6 times more the amount of fighters that are part of the Islamic State. So obviously it's like, inconclusive information. They're just hitting points, attacking, summarily trying to do what they want to do, just create chaos. Fitna to shaddu min al-qatl, basically. Right. So there's fitna everywhere. And so in terms of IS then, what is the US strategy relating to this particular organization, and are they then responding to fitna in this fighting of theirs, or what is it? How do we understand it?
I think the first thing to understand about the US strategy is most often US strategy is actually directed towards its own population. So they're doing things out there in the world, obviously for interests.
Yes, national interest.
So national interest is one, but the other thing is they have to appease their own population in some way or the other. And in many ways, I would even say, and even with the latest video of the alleged beheading of Peter Kasig and the other Syrian soldiers, IS in many ways tempts them, and sort of
it's luring them.
Yeah, it's luring them. And even now, so it said, oh, you keep saying that you won't send your. I'm paraphrasing here, I might be getting something wrong, but the idea is that they're tempting them to put boots on the ground. Okay. So I would say something similar to that happened with Obama when American, I'm forgetting his name, James Foley. When James Foley was beheaded, and Obama felt that he had to do something. especially with, elections coming around, where the Senate elections are up for grabs. And I mean, there's a huge battle going on within Democrats and the Republicans. And U.S. could not, or Obama could not just look like he's not doing anything and open up his whole party for criticism. So they went in and they decided to, strike, engage in airstrikes within Syria. Now, this has come under so much criticism from all over the world, because either, I'm not saying the Assad government is a good government, but the larger point is that either you have to make peace with the Assad government, or you have to arm the rebels to such an extent that they are able to take down the Assad government and also the Islamic State IS. None of that is happening. Does that necessarily mean that U.S. is supporting the Assad government? I'm not sure. They might be imagining something like a Cantonization, what happened during the Lebanon war. That there are different warlords controlling different parts of the region, and you just maintain that status quo. So all that you're doing is not allowing IS to grow. So even though
keeping them confined.
Yeah, keeping them confined. So even though the official rhetoric that the U.S. maintains is degrade and destroy. Those are the two terms that Obama used in his speech, and that is how he sold the whole effort to his population. But strategically, it might be an issue of just trying to contain them in a place and then slowly trying to strangle them, either monetarily, economically, through targeted hits, the kinds of things that they did with Osama bin Laden.
Yes.
You line special teams, they go out, engage in assassinations, come out. So something like that. But again, we're not at that stage yet. Right now, the stage is to just contain them, push them out of Iraq, bring them back into Syria, and just contain them over there. Okay,
but in terms of strategy then, will ISIS or Islamic State, will they be confined? Because the latest report was that they're developing their own currency. That's the first thing. There's been new articles to say that the extent of the territory that they now control is far greater than what was anticipated. And thirdly, this whole idea of Khilafah. Khilafah it's a burning flame, I think, in many of the hearts of the Muslims. So if you put these three together, is there a sign? Let me just put it this way. I was discussing it with one of my professors, and he said, Quraysha, let's just face it. If Islamic State wins, then they're the negotiators and they're the freedom fighters. If they lose, they will forever be the terrorists. Yeah. So how will we then place this context?
I mean, on this last point, let me pick that up first. Look at Taliban. Taliban were demonized, 13 years ago to no end. Now they are, sort of a legitimate discussion partner in Afghanistan, and nobody, can really imagine a solution without Taliban. And openly, Western and Afghani politicians are recognizing that fact. So again, the word terrorist, from an analyst's perspective, it doesn't mean anything. All it means is, right now you're my enemy. Later on, you might be my friend. Right. You might be my neutral person, acquaintance. So I wouldn't put too much, wouldn't read too much into the terrorist labeling that the U.S. is engaging in. But I'm sorry, I forgot.
The currency?
So whether the Islamic State is stable, is a stable entity or not. If you look at the currency issue, so this is a very complex debate. But let me just put it this way. For an economy to flourish, it needs to engage in trade.
Yes.
It can be self-sufficient for only a certain extent of time. Trade will not happen with the Islamic State officially. What can happen is unofficial smuggling, right? And basically, anytime trade becomes unofficial, it's called smuggling. So you can call it, official smuggling or
unofficial smuggling,
whatever. But the larger point is that is the only way in which Islamic State and the territories that it controls will be able to see economic flourishment. But at the end of the day, in a war-torn region, people are not looking to buy BMWs. People are looking to survive. Right now, or the best estimates that I know of, suggest that even before the takeover of Mosul in the dramatic manner that IS was able to achieve, it was self-sufficient to an extent that no other terrorist organization is. It has in hundreds of millions of dollars reserves. Can it back whatever new currency it creates with that
paper money?
Yeah, with that paper money, it probably can. The oil networks, the smuggling networks that are set up, and from the time period of Saddam Hussein when the sanctions were there, but Saddam was still smuggling oil and surviving. Those networks, whether through Syria, whether through Kurdistan, whether through Turkey, whether through Iraq, these networks are in place. We haven't really been able to close them. What US has targeted are certain oil fields and certain, makeshift refineries and things like that. But, in the long run, I think one should expect this problem. I shouldn't say that IS will be able to consolidate. Let me put it this way. IS and whatever territory it governs will not be able to be taken apart for the next few years. At least I don't see it. Maybe some miraculous event would happen, but I don't see it's possible.
So you believe there are strategic leaders within the organization who know how to use what is available to them?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, that doesn't mean that everything that they're doing is very strategic.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think that many of them have certain backgrounds. And in general, I would say this about the jihadi world. Like them or don't like them, if you actually read the literature they produce, they have some very smart people doing a lot of thinking for them. And that comes through in most of the literature that they produce.
And I suppose what we have to keep in mind is that most of them are fighting a defensive war. They're basically on the defensive. It's not that they're on the offensive.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the Khilafah? How do we understand this Khilafah? Because we have to conclude with that.
Okay. I mean, one thing, the Khilafah, like you said, it's sort of an issue that a lot of Muslims are animated by. And even Al-Qaeda, for a very long time, had maintained that, yes, Khilafah is its end goal. But right now, they thought at this time, this is not the time to declare Khilafah. The time is to wait, build the Imarat, sort of the Emirates in different places. And then once Muslims control enough sufficient territory, then you go out and you declare some sort of Khilafah, despite the fact that they called Mullah Omar of Taliban Amir al-Mu'mineen. So effectively, they had already, pledged their allegiance to him. And he was the de facto sort of Khalifa for them. That's the title Amir al-Mu'mineen is reserved for it. So, but what IS has done, it has established a Khilafah which was based on the basic idea that, first of all, they control territory. And they said, we control big enough territory that we don't need to wait and declare Khilafah later on. And then there are other factors which were at work, one of them being that they look back upon 2006 and they started quoting people like Anwar al-Awlaki, Osama bin Laden, and they said, even in 2006, all of these people thought there was something special about the establishment of the Islamic State in Iraq. And our presence was never like the presence of Imarat in say, Somalia or in Yemen. And they said, we were something special. We were the germ out of which the Khilafah would come. And you see this constantly in their documents. So that's another reason. And a third reason, which I think, on the basis of which they might actually, within the jihadi world, outdo the claims that Al-Qaeda is making, it has to do with the Qurayshi lineage of the Khalifa. Now, this is something that most Muslims had effectively forgotten, but they have revived it and they said, no, this is one of the earliest requirements within the Khilafah literature that Muslims have produced. And Mullah Omar is not a Qurayshi. He's not from the tribe of the Prophet. Hence, he cannot be the leader and the Khalif.
Okay, but we've come to the end, and I need to bring this particular question to you. Is considering that already there's been a disagreement between Al-Qaeda and IS. Say, for instance, the hostilities come to an end and IS has managed to establish, because IS is effectively challenging the whole notion of a nation state also. They said, we control the territory, why should we wait? Let's declare it a nation state in terms of their Islamic understanding. So they're challenging different aspects. But my question to you is that, considering that there are these disagreements, how is everybody going to fall under one leadership when it's obvious already that the jihadis themselves are not prepared to recognize Khilafah in one particular individual?
Well, there are two ways to sort of think about this. One is from Islamic State's perspective, especially with their radical takfirism. Right? Anybody who doesn't agree is a non-Muslim. So the issue of disagreement really is a non-issue. Because,
but them, okay.
Yeah, because if you disagree, you're not a Muslim. So,
Okay.
And the other issue is, Khilafah, attempts at establishing Khilafah are not new. This is a very old problem in Islamic history, starting from the Umayyads, down up until the Ottomans. Everybody tried to establish their claims to the Khilafah, and Muslims have never really agreed. So this might be one of those other instances in which we can remember the Prophet's hadith, in which he said, disagreement is a blessing within my ummah. So let's see. I don't think we will at any point agree on this issue.
Yeah, but if it's if the Prophet ﷺ said it is a blessing, then certainly it is a blessing. But let us hope that from this blessing, where we get some stability and we get izzah for the Muslim lands again, because the Muslim lands have hugely been disgraced, especially the people. The ordinary people are suffering from tantamount disgrace, humiliation, abuse, and I think it's time for that elevation to come. So if it's going to be from the Islamic State, I don't know. What do you think? As a closing point,
for the Muslims, yes.
Inshallah. So let us be, because La tayassumi rawhillah, we should never be despondent, and we should always hope, be optimistic. So let us be optimistic, and let's hope that even if the Islamic State is making mistakes, and they have their press office, they have media, as you have said, perhaps they're wise enough or humble enough to learn from these mistakes and take advice from other people, so that they can create this perception of an inclusive ummah and somebody who's out to establish justice.
And if they're not, then may somebody else better replace them.
Of course. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.